Okay, so the way that we're going to do this and the way that I will try to do this moving forward is I'm going to ask you some general questions first about what we liked from the readings, see if you have any questions, and then just try to connect it all together. My main goal, if you watched, did both of you watch last week's video that I made? Okay, so I think the main thing I want you to take away from this first half of the semester is how to use rhetoric ethically for self-presentation. Meaning, like, how do you persuade an audience or demonstrate something to an audience in a way that is ethical or moral, whatever we want to say about that, by whatever standards that we choose. And how do you use those tools in a way that that can present yourself to an audience so that they're seeing sort of the truth of who you are without deceiving them, if that makes sense. And one of the reasons, so before I get into the questions here, one of the reasons I chose Julius Caesar is because if you notice in Gorgias, Socrates is talking about how rhetoric is problematic because anybody can use it to appear, to deceive, essentially, to appear smarter than they are or to know more than they do. And Aristotle sort of combats that by saying, well, that's true, but that's why it's important to be a good person, to be ethical. And then when we looked at the suffering and justice from last week, my kind of idea with that was to show that it's difficult to know what it means to be good because that definition changes all the time and culture changes that definition. And so the idea of suffering or seeking out justice is really dependent on the context of the situation. And so today we're going to get sort of a more personal example, not personal example, but Julius Caesar acts as a really great example of two different people, one of them sort of really being good, like good-natured and well-intentioned, like Brutus, but not knowing really anything about self-presentation or self-preservation for that matter. And then Mark Antony, who's kind of, I don't want to say he's evil by any means, but he's certainly one of the reasons that the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire. And so that, and we see in this act that I had you all read that he's a very strong rhetorician. Like, he knows how to use rhetoric. He knows how to whip up a crowd, even though he tells them he doesn't know how to do that, which is a rhetorical tool. So I like this example because it gives us an idea of like what happens when a good person that isn't equipped with rhetoric meets, a morally ambiguous person who is equipped with rhetoric, and what that means for sort of society and everybody else. So that's my spiel on what I want us to kind of think about today. But I always like to start with first just going around the room and hearing about what you all thought of the readings. So what I like to do first is just, and we'll start with Alex. What did you like from the readings? What did you not like? Was there something that stood out to you, and why?
I like comparing reading the Julius Caesar Act to 8 Mile because I thought it was really interesting, the difference between who went first. And I liked how in like the Julius Caesar one, like it made total sense for Brutus to go first because this guy was able to like just bash him. But in how Mark Antony could bash him, but like in 8 Mile, he basically takes away the power from the guy who goes second by basically making his argument for him and turning it against him. And I thought that was like totally interesting how like, the difference there like played into it and changed how the arguments worked.
Yeah, and I actually want to talk about that today because it's one of the reasons I selected both of them. When I took Shakespeare, my Shakespeare class in college, we talked about this scene where, we talked about a little bit in terms of like who went first, who went second, and the fact that Brutus is using more of like an open form of dialogue, and Mark Antony kind of has a more structured meter, and like little things like that. But then I also read an article in grad school about the rhetorical effect of a lot of the decisions that are made. So I'm glad that you brought that up because it is really important to the story why Mark Antony goes second. And it's the same thing with 8 Mile because he always goes second in all the rap battles except the last one. And like that's where the crux of his of winning, like his winning comes because he goes first and he's able to kind of like underpin all of the arguments against him. So I'm glad you brought that up. We're going to talk about that. And then is there something you just didn't like something that
I don't think so. I think I enjoyed reading that. I also enjoyed reading the soliloquy, and then I liked watching the rap battle. That was cool.
Okay, cool. You know, what about you?
I have to agree with Alex. My favorite thing about the entire piece that we read was being able to compare it to 8 Mile, because of the way that it was like, I don't know, I just thought it, I mean, stating the obvious, like it was really nice to compare like how like, okay, wait. 8 Mile is, we're talking about the rap battle, right?
Yep.
Okay. I'm on the same page. Um, I thought it was really nice to compare like how like we use like rhetoric in like modern day society versus how it was used like a really long time ago, and just like the transformation of that. So I thought like seeing that was really cool. Um, if there's anything I didn't like, it was just getting through the meat of Julius Caesar. Sorry, had to say it. I just like, for some reason, me and Shakespeare, we're not besties, but I enjoyed it. It was good.
Good. Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that. I think one of the reasons I only wanted to do a scene is because, I mean, we could talk about this for a semester and not even, get everything out of it. And like I've read this numerous times. I read it in high school, read it in college. I know tons of things about Shakespeare, but there's just so much. I mean, you really have to go back through the history, not just like of Shakespeare's time, to understand like the way he's interpreting Julius Caesar, but like understanding the Roman Republic, which is just, it's like, unless you're a historian whose job it is to study that, it's almost impossible to really grasp it. And what really happened. And so we kind of dumb it down into these like Sunday school stories of, oh, well, the Roman Republic was in dire straits. Julius Caesar came in and seized power to get them back on track. And then he was murdered for his ambition. And then that led to a bunch of infighting and civil war. And then it just evolved into an autocracy. But there's I was like reviewing some things today, but like the actual time between Caesar and the empire is like hundreds of years. It's not like an overnight thing where this thing happened and we can understand it. It's like there's so many aspects of this change that happened, and it did lead to like 5 really good emperors. So it's not like everybody was evil. Julius Caesar wasn't even technically evil. They just didn't like the fact that he was sort of, it wasn't Republican or democratic of him to hold power over the state like that. So I agree. I think it's definitely a lot to trudge through. And also Shakespeare, when he says things like, hold on. One of the things I want to talk about is how, like, the way they introduce both of their speeches. So it's like Mark Antony's favorite opening or famous opening is "Friends, Romans, Countrymen," right? And so he has this like this order of saying like friends first, Romans second, countrymen third. And then it's supposed to reflect, it's supposed to be the opposite of what Brutus does, Romans, countrymen, and lovers, but they don't use the same term for friends. It says Roman countrymen and lovers. And it's like, it's a small change, but it's so much to unpack, So it's like, you can't just read it like, you can't read it like you watch 8 Mile and just understand everything Eminem's saying. It's like you have to understand the significance of one, putting friends first versus putting lovers at the end, and why they mean the same but they don't, and what does that mean rhetorically for what's happening in the moment. So I agree, it's a lot, but what doesn't kill us makes us stronger and weirder at the same time. So well, let's start with 8 Mile then, because I think it's an accessible way to get into this. But have you both seen 8 Mile before? Okay, so do you know, like, have you seen it at all outside of the rap battles that we watched? Okay, so let me give you a quick synopsis just so we can understand some of the context. But it's sort of autobiographical about Eminem's life. It's not super autobiographical, but it is about sort of his like upbringing in the Detroit area and experiencing those rap battles, which do actually happen, and him trying to become famous. And the major factor is this this 8 Mile road, or this like stretch of the train tracks. And so they don't really talk too much about it in the movie. It's referenced, but you kind of have to dig a little deeper to understand it. And so there's this sort of cultural divide in that town in New York, or not New York, Detroit, where all the sort of rich, well-to-do white people live on one side of the 8 Mile tracks, and all of the inner city urban people of color live on the other side of the tracks. But on the edge of those tracks, on the white side, of the white neighborhood side, are trailer parks by really poor white individuals. And so that's where Eminem and his family live. And he's living at the time with his mother in a trailer with his sister, and this guy that he went to high school with is sleeping with his mom, and it's like really weird situation. So Eminem is like one of the few white people that hangs out in inner city Detroit, and he's trying to make it as a rapper, but no one takes him seriously. And a lot of that is because of perception. Like they view him being white as being from the wrong side of the tracks, like you're in this upper middle class area. And so they think a lot of like what he does is deceptive, that he dresses in a certain way, like he dresses like a bum to look like to fit in, but it's really because he's poor. You know, he's not trying to look the part of a Detroit rapper. He just is poor. He's literally living out of trash bags at some point. But then the villain at the end, Anthony Mackie's character that he goes up against, Papa Doc, is kind of the opposite. Everybody views him as this great rapper. He's sort of he's persuaded the entire group to think that he is identifiable with them because he's not just black, but he understands the Detroit experience. And he dresses much nicer than everybody else, but people suggest it's because he's living life the right way. Like he's from the inner city side of the 8 Mile tracks, but he hustles. He's a good rapper. You know, he's probably dealing all this other stuff. So all of his demeanor and the way he carries himself and all of his clothes, and he drives an Escalade. This isn't because he's rich, it's because he hustled to get where he is. So he's still identified as one of the group. And what we see at the end, and the reason that's important is because the end, Eminem calls out that actually everybody has it backwards. Even though I'm from the white side of the tracks, I'm just as poor as you. And I belong here because we are sort of the same. Whereas Papa Doc is actually this rich, well-to-do person. And skin color doesn't have anything to do with it. We're actually talking about class structure instead of race, which I think is one of the more powerful parts of that movie at the end. So I don't know if that changes, like, does that change anything about your perspective of those battles at the end? No, it's pretty self-explanatory for the most part. I just wanted to explain like that sort of divide and why there's a lot of vitriol to Eminem in that movie, because he's considered an outsider, even though he is part of that group. But so let's dive into it. So what do we notice rhetorically? And it doesn't necessarily have to be from that list of rhetoric that I gave you, but what does he do in these rap battles that sort of helps him not just win the battle, but also persuade the audience or demonstrate to the audience that he's one of them? How does he present himself?
He like owns up to his own. I kind of interpreted it as insecurities because I don't know a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
But like he like calls out the things about him that like other people will call out, like being poor, you know, being like white trash. And I think that makes the audience like identify a little bit with him more, and it kind of like takes the power away from those things because he's like owning them, like they can't be used against him.
Okay. I like that you said takes the power away from. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So like if you um like if you use it against yourself and you like incorporate like you don't show that like you're like insecure about your identity, it doesn't give people the ability to use it to hurt you, if you don't let it hurt you.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. There's actually a scene earlier in the film which I think is sort of the catalyst for him opening up about it. But there's a scene where like him and his friend, it's Mekhi Phifer's character. What's his name? The guy with the dreads. He like runs the battles. Um, they're friends outside of the rap battles, and they're at home one day working on his car, and they start rapping to Leonard Skinner, because that guy, like the guy they went to high school with, that's sleeping with Eminem's mom, he's in the house drunk, listening, like blasting Leonard Skinner, and they're outside fixing the car, and they just start rapping about how terrible his life is. Like they're just making fun of him, and that's like one of the first times that Eminem's character really opens up and realizes like I'm in a shitty situation, but I'm gonna own it. And so it's this really funny rap about how he's white trash. But that's like the first time that he does that, and I think it's a catalyst for him doing it later. So I agree with you. I think that's a really good point, that he's sort of like not giving them power over who he is. He's sort of taking that back for himself. What about you?
I feel like something else that he does, like kind of piggybacking off of that, is he kind of like, I mean, obviously when you rap, you're going to like change the words that you're using, but I feel like he specifically uses words to like connect with his audience, and make them not like sympathize with him, but like maybe better understand him.
Okay. Like what words specifically? Do you have any in mind?
um
Wow.
Not off the top of my head. Yeah, not off the top of my head.
I mean, you can generalize. It doesn't need to be the specific, but are there like moments that you think of?
Um Maybe when he's like talking about not only like his poor situation, but like when he's trying to like roast the other people that he's like battling against, he just uses words that like kind of like ground them all and like connect them to the same situation, like you were saying. Yeah, I can't think of any specifics, but just like moments like that remind me of it.
Okay, cool. What other tactics do we see him using in those battles?
I'm not sure if it's like a tactic or not, but I noticed that a few times instead of like saying like lines or whatever, he would just like say like random words and like phrases. And I thought maybe that could be like used to like throw off the other person. Like instead of like using like actual like roasts, he was just like saying random stuff. And I'm not really sure too much more on my thought process of that, but I noticed that like a few times. I noticed how the other person always kind of looked like a little like confused.
Okay, that's interesting. So like you both brought up like things that he's saying. So let's actually go. I'm gonna turn this on real quick. I'm gonna share my screen. Let's just watch a little bit of this.
It's your turn, baby.
Can you hear that? Okay.
5 seconds. Let's feel it. DJ, spin that shit.
Maybe Eminem.
All right, look. Hey, yo. This guy raps like his parents jerked him. He sounds like Eric Sermon, the generic version. This whole crowd looks suspicious. It's all dudes in here, except for these bitches. So I'm a German, eh? That's a great smile.
So is that one of the parts you were talking about? He's just sort of like gibbering.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second. Like why is he doing that?
Street with paddle. This beat is still gonna sink. You're in disgrace. Yeah, they call me rabbit. This is a turtle race. They can't get with me spitting this shit wickedly lickety shots. Cause we're just spiggity split lickety.
It's like he's making fun of the way that the other guy raps because he's saying like spitting this shit. So I guess it's like comparing him to like being like a mumbling person. Like he can't like say like actual roast, he just mumbles through it.
Right. Yeah. It's like he's kind of like making fun of him for like, oh, you can flow, but you can't, like you're not actually using words that make sense. Um, that's a really good point. I like also that he's kind of just making fun of his name too, because I think his name's Lickety Split, his actual name in the movie. So like at the end there, he's sort of like it's a jab at him too. Um, like your rap is gibberish, much like your name. So that's kind of interesting. One thing too about this, I like sometimes I talk about this in 101 and 102 as just a, like baseline for rhetoric. One of the interesting things about this is that rap battles are like the way that you kind of win a rap battle is how well you can put down your opponent. So it's kind of like it's not about showing that you're a better person so much as like how well you effectively talk about why the other person sucks, which I always thought was interesting. So it's like an inversion of, I'm not here to laud myself. I'm here to talk about how terrible somebody is, but do so in a way that people enjoy, if that makes sense. All right, so let's go. So Mina, were there any words there that you noticed?
Not specifically like in that section.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next one.
Ward, I think you were a little hard on the beaver. So was Eddie Haskell, Wally, and Miss Cleaver. This guy keeps screaming. He's paranoid. Quick, someone get his ass another steroid. I hear, what did you say? Hibbity hoopla. Is that a tank top or a new bra? Look, Snoop Dogg has got a fucking boob top. Did you listen to your last round, meathead? Pay attention. You're saying the same shit that he said. Matter of fact, dog, here's a pencil. Go home, write some shit, make it suspenseful, and don't come back until something don't hit you. Fuck it. You can take the mic home with you. Looking like a cyclone hit you. Tank top screaming lotto, I don't beat you. You see how far the white jokes get you? Boys like, I remember Ice gonna get you. My motto, fuck lotto. I'll get the 7 digits from your mother for $1 tomorrow.
All right, so what do we notice in that one?
I feel like he's definitely doing a little bit more of like connecting with his crowd, just because he like turns the conversation to them to make it like an enjoyable conversation for everybody in the room rather than just the two of the rappers.
Yeah, that's a really great point because I think the movie opens up with him failing. Like it opens up with him in a rap battle. He's getting, so you know the song "Lose Yourself," right? By Eminem. The lyrics of that describe the beginning of the movie. So, and he's like, his palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. There's vomit on his sweater already. Mom's spaghetti. That's what's happening to him in the bathroom in the beginning of the movie. He's like in the bathroom trying to rap. He gets nervous and sick, and he goes and throws up. And he walks out, and his friend who runs the battles is like, "What's going on?" He's got to change his shirt because he's got vomit on it. And they're like, "What is that, spaghetti?" So it's like it's just funny because it's describing the opening scene where he fails. And I think in the first rap, he doesn't connect with the audience so much because he's just trying to get through it. But in this one, as you point out, really, really well, like he's sort of turning more to them to get them involved in the experience. Why is that important? What's significant about that?
I feel like if you're doing a rap battle, it's important for like the audience to like you. I don't know if that's like stating the obvious, but I feel like both of these people are going up there and I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the winner decided by like the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what happens. So, so let's just take a second to compare this to Julius Caesar. How is this similar to what Mark Antony is trying to do? Like, why does he invoke the crowd so much in his speech? Why does he need to do that?
He needs them to feel connected to him and how he feels about Caesar. And he needs to convince them to stray from feeling how Brutus feels.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, you know, Socrates gets nervous, because his whole point is, if you can convince somebody that you're right, even in the face of, you know, facts, that, you know, that can be scary, because if you can whip up a crowd, you can essentially get them to do anything. I think Eminem's doing it a little bit more morally here. Like, he's trying to whip up the crowd to win a competition. But what is Mark Antony trying to do?
I feel like he's trying to like evoke empathy from the audience, or even, I guess empathy would be the right word. Just kind of like what Alex said, like making a connection with them so that they like, so you can kind of manipulate them.
Yeah. So let's keep going here. I was gonna get it. So it doesn't, I want to point out real quick, it doesn't do this in the clip. But they flip a coin to see who goes first. And Papa Doc wins the coin toss. And so he has the opportunity to go first, like everybody else. And he very arrogantly says, let that bitch go first. That's his quote. And I wanted to point that out because it's exactly what Brutus does, right? Brutus is like, oh, I'll go first, you know, and then I can leave. And it's just this really poor rhetorical mistake, rhetorical choice, where he's like, obviously Brutus goes first and Papa Doc doesn't, but they both decide who, like, when they're going to go. And it's in that arrogance or the lack of understanding of the situation that actually makes them lose the argument that they're in, which I think is really interesting.
So everybody from the 313, put your motherfucking hands up and follow me. Everybody from the 313, put your motherfucking hands up. Look. Now while he stands tall, notice that this man did not have his hands up. This free world's got you gassed up. Now who's afraid of the big bad boy?
All right, so I want to break this down little bit by little bit. So what's he doing here that's different from before?
I feel like he's kind of like grouping everybody together, but singling Papa Doc, if that's his name, I think.
Yeah.
He's singling him out. And I feel like it's kind of like in relation to what you were saying about how he like is from the area, but he is from a different social class right now, or economic class. So he's not like really connecting with the rest of them.
Yeah. And why, like, compare this to what he does at the beginning of or compare this to his entire first rap. Like, what's just in the first two raps, he goes immediately to the people. This one, he turns away from them. Like, he's not even concerned about Papa Doc yet. He's just like, let me turn to the crowd. Like, why would he do that? He has plenty of room to, he can attack Papa Doc directly without doing this song and dance. But like, the significance of this is that he does what? So like, let's go back just a quick second. Because watch his reaction or his face, and then when he makes the decision to turn to the audience.
So everybody come to
All right, now compare that with this.
All right, look. Hey, yo. This guy raps like it's. So everybody.
What's different?
He's like ostracizing Papa Doc.
Yeah,
By completely like ignoring him, he's not a part of the group at all. He's just like a bystander to everyone else.
yeah. This like it's completely inverted from what we see at the beginning of the movie and just the beginning of these rap battles. Like he was ostracized at the beginning, and now he realizes he has the crowd on his side, so he doesn't need to go after Papa Doc. He really needs to just focus on the crowd and get them in on it, right? And that's what Mark Antony does. Like Brutus. So let's talk about Julius Caesar here for a second. You can pull up, I don't know how you have it, if you're just online, or I have this Folger's text. So at the beginning, Brutus is saying, follow me and give me audience, friends. Cassius, you go into the other street and part the numbers. Those that will hear me speak, let them stay here. Those that will follow Cassius, go with him. And he's saying, like, if you read his speech, and I'll just read parts of it, be patient to the last. Romans, countrymen, and lovers, hear me for my cause and be silent that you may hear. Believe me for mine honor and have respect for mine honor that you may believe. Censure me in your wisdom and awake your senses that you may be the better judge. And he says later, Caesar loved me, I wept for him. As he was unfortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him. But he was ambitious, I slew him. There's tears for his joy, his love, joy for his fortune, honor for his valor, and death for his ambition. Who here so base that would be a bondman? So he's like, the focus is on him. It's not about the crowd or what the crowd thinks. He's like, let me just talk about myself. And then go later to Mark Antony's speech in line 81, 82. He says, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. And then he doesn't really talk about himself. He says, when he uses I, he says, he's talking about how he just came here to talk about Caesar. Come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me, but Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He says, he hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. So he's not talking about himself. He's pointing out the issue with Brutus and the thing that we should like about Caesar. And so compare that here. What's Eminem doing? Is he making it about him versus Papa Doc? Is Mark Antony making it about him versus Brutus? Or who's against whom here?
I feel like they're both just trying to prove themselves, like individually to the audience.
Okay. But so let's talk about that though. What role does the audience play in that? He's trying to prove himself, yes. But why? Think about, he doesn't address the audience in the first rap. He starts to turn towards the audience in the second one. And in the third one, he just ignores Papa Doc completely and starts immediately with the audience. And then if we look at Brutus and Mark Antony's addressing an audience, but it's all about him. You know, let me defend myself. This is why I had to do it. This is Caesar's funeral, but let's not talk about, you know, him being dead. Let's talk about why I needed to kill him. Versus Mark Antony saying, you know, let's not talk about me. I'm not a man of words like Brutus. Let's talk about Caesar. Let's talk about Brutus. Let's talk about you. And he goes on to talk to like keep the focus on the crowd and how they feel. So what's the significance there? That they're trying to prove themselves, but the focus isn't on them, it's on the crowd. What's significant about that? Why would the crowd be important in justifying who they are? Let me ask it this way. Socrates says he's worried because a man of science talking about disease could be overruled by a man of rhetoric who merely sounds like he knows more than the physician, right? But who decides that? Who gives them the power of what's true and what isn't?
The crowd does.
Yeah.
They're like the judge.
Yeah. Keep going.
It's like, it's just whoever they decide is correct becomes like the truth, whether it's true or not.
Right. And so this is the whole conundrum for Socrates. It's like, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's not about you necessarily. It's that everything that you do is either justified and defended or not, based on how it's interpreted by the audience. And so there's this missing factor in terms of the person that's writing or speaking or whatever. You know, they can speak until they're blue in the face. It doesn't really matter what they say as much as it matters how the audience perceives them, which is kind of based on what they say, but how they connect to the audience is very significant, right? So let's keep playing this for a second.
Everybody from the 313, put your motherfucking hands on the cloud on me. Everybody from the 313, put your motherfucking hands up. Look. Now while he stands tall, notice that this man did not have his hands up. The three rails got you gassed up. Now who's afraid of the big bad boy? 1, 2, 3 into the 4. 1 pop, 2 pop, 3 pop, 4. 4 pop, 3 pop, 2 pop, 1. Your pop, he's pop, no pop, none. This guy ain't no motherfucking MC. I know everything he's got to say against me. I am right, I am a fucking bum. I do live in a trailer with my mom. My boy Future is an Uncle Tom. I do got a dumb friend named Cheddar Bob who shoots himself in his leg with his own gun. I did get jumped by all 6 of you chumps. And we did fuck my girl. I'm still standing here screaming fuck the free world. You'll never try to judge me, dude. You don't know what the fuck I've been through. But I know something about you. You went to Cranbrook, that's a private school. What's the matter, dog? You in Paris? This guy's a gangster? His real name is Clarence. And Clarence lives at home with both parents. And Clarence's parents have a real good marriage. This guy don't want to battle. He's shook. There ain't no such thing as halfway crook. He's scared to death. He's scared to...
All right. So what's happening to Papa Doc here?
His like actual identity is getting exposed.
Yeah. And how does that conflict with the identity of the group?
it like pits him against them because they're realizing that he really just is not one of them and that he truly can't connect with them.
Yeah, and what, like, so Eminem's talking about, he's like, he's a bum, he's white trash, his mom, he lives in a trailer with his mom. He's, you know, what some might call a cuckold now because he was with a girl that somebody else slept with. So he does, you know, he might not seem masculine in this particular environment. But why are those things, like, why would the audience identify with those things? In a poor inner city neighborhood in Detroit. What are they identifying with? He's broke. He works but has no money. He lives in a trailer with his mom. Can't even keep a girlfriend. His friends are stupid enough to shoot themselves in the foot, or not the foot. Like, what's he describing? Is his life perfect? No, it's what?
Troubled.
Yeah, keep going. Troubled. He has to what? In order to survive, he has to what?
Like really work for everything that he has.
Yeah. Keep going. So he's got to work for everything that he has. Why does that connect with the audience in a poor inner city neighborhood?
Because all of them have to do the same thing to survive, because every person in the room, I guess except for Papa Doc, is deemed by society not as good as the ones who are deeming them not as good.
Yeah. So he's pointing out this fundamental difference that it doesn't really matter at the end of the day what they say in raps, because, you know, Eminem could have lost any of those battles if he didn't do a good job. It didn't really matter what they said. Ultimately, it was about who the crowd liked more, like who could they identify with more. And at the time, they identified more with Papa Doc's people because Papa Doc sort of, he was this, I don't want to say like mythic figure, but he was sort of like virtuous for that community. He represented like what can happen to you if you struggle and hustle, right? He represented someone from the wrong side of the tracks that, you know, struggled to get where he is. He hustled, he did what he had to. And now look at him. People know who he is. He commands respect. He drives an Escalade. He wears nice clothes. He doesn't have to work in a stamping factory like Eminem does. He's not white trash. You know, he lives in a home that he purchased, but he's not different from them because he came from this community. What Eminem's able to do is say, no. He's not any of those things. He's not like you at all. He didn't struggle at all. He was given all of this stuff. So let's then compare that to Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. What does Mark Antony do? Let's go to okay, go to line, I'm in Julius Caesar, line 222. So it's Mark Antony, good friends, sweet friends. Let me want to pull this up on here too. Might be a little, okay. Yeah, I think in this it's line 201. Sorry, I forgot some of the lines are different. So here's the script from the Shakespeare.com site. Okay, so he says, good friends, sweet friends, let me not stir you up to such a sudden flood of mutiny. They that have done this deed are honorable, killed Caesar are honorable. What private griefs they have, alas, I know not, that made them do it. They are wise and honorable, and will no doubt with reasons answer you. I come not, friends, to steal away your hearts. I am no orator as Brutus is, but as you know me all, a plain blunt man, that love my friend, and that they know full well that gave me public leave to speak of him. For I have neither wit nor words nor worth, action nor utterance, nor the power of speech to stir men's blood. I only speak right on. I speak plainly. I tell you that which you yourselves do know. Show you sweet Caesar's wounds, poor dumb mouths, and bid them speak for me. But were I Brutus and Brutus Antony, and Antony would ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar that should move the stones of Rome to rise in mutiny. So he's saying, don't take my word for it. Just look at Caesar's wounds and decide for yourself. And then immediately they're like, we'll mutiny, we'll burn the house of Brutus. He says, I'm not trying to whip you up. And then immediately they're whipped up, right? I'm not a man of words or rhetoric. I'm just shooting it plain, right? Shooting straight from the hip. And then okay, so it's not in this scene. I think in the next scene, then he goes on, which I didn't have you read, so that's fine. But in the next scene, he keeps going and he talks about Caesar's will. And no, it's in this scene, right? Hold on. Trying to find the line. Okay, here it is. Sorry. It's 1:30 for me. Okay. So this is after his big speech, and he says, here's a parchment with the seal of Caesar. I found it in his closet. It's his will. Let but the commons hear this testament, which, pardon me, I do not mean to read. And they would go and kiss dead Caesar's wounds and dip their napkins in his sacred blood. Yet beg a hair of him for memory, and dying mention it within their wills. And then everyone says, we want to hear the will, read the will. And Anthony's like, he's playing coy. He's like, oh, have patience. I must not read it. It's not meet, how Caesar loves you. It's not, it's not on me. It's not appropriate for me to tell you how Caesar loved you. You're not wood, you're not stones, but men. And being men, hearing the will of Caesar, it will inflame you. It will make you mad, right? But he wants them to be mad. We know this. So he's being coy. He's trying to act like he's doing them a favor. And then so he descends. So he says, if you have tears, prepare to shed them now. You all do know this mantle. I remember the first time ever Caesar put it on. And then he starts showing all the wounds. So he says, look, in this place ran Cassius's dagger through. See what a rent the envious Casca made. Through this, the well-beloved Brutus stabbed, and he was plucked his curse steal away. So he's like pointing out each individual mark and showing them how brutal each one was. And this sort of whips them up, right? How is this similar to what Eminem does? Obviously, no one died in Eminem or 8 Mile. But what is Anthony doing that's similar to what Eminem's doing?
It's like he's ostracizing Brutus and the people who stabbed Caesar, because he whips them up with the will, and he's like, oh, you'd be mad, or you'd really love Caesar if you heard about the will. And then he also says that it's like Brutus's fault that he won't read it. Like he mentions how he feels like he would offend them if he read it and you like ruin their honor. So he like relates them not getting to hear the will with Brutus. And then he goes, and after saying you would love Caesar, he goes, it's like, well, this is where Brutus stabbed him. This is where Cassius stabbed him. And he's like directly ostracizing them away from the common people and then associating himself, Caesar, and the common people together.
Yeah, he's in a more sinister way. So Eminem is trying to show the crowd how Papa Doc deceived them. Like, look how he's used these rhetorical tactics to deceive you to think that Papa Doc is one of you. Mark Antony is doing the same thing. He's like, but in a more sinister way, he's saying, oh, Brutus and his like claim that they did this for the good of the Republic, that Caesar had too much power, he was ambitious. But look how evil these wounds are. Look how, frightfully they stabbed this man who loved you so much. How much we can only know by reading his will. And then what ends up happening later is like, when he does read the will, he talks about how Caesar is trying to give them all these public lands and money. And so he paints Caesar as this good person. And so it becomes like, it's the inverse of Eminem in 8 Mile, right? Where he's doing the same thing to say, oh, look how you've been deceived. But Mark Antony's actually deceiving. He's the one actually doing the deceiving. So Brutus and the senators were worried that Caesar was going to maintain power, and was so ambitious that he was just going to create this empire rather than maintain the republic. So they killed him for it. They more or less convinced Brutus to do it when he didn't want to. But Mark Antony's saying, no, Caesar is actually going to help you. These men took that away from you. They're the deceivers. So in the same way, they're doing the exact same thing. It's just sort of inverted a little bit. But let me get to the point here then. Compare this to anything that you have to do in writing. So whenever you are speaking to a crowd or you're writing to an audience, when you create this portfolio by the end of the semester, why is it important to understand this about your audience? Like, why is the audience so significant in this effort to present yourself?
I feel like it could be because the audience are the people who are going to perceive you. And in order to make like a good impression of yourself or to make yourself known, you have to come across in a certain way to the people that you're aiming to come across to.
Yeah, absolutely. Meaning is not inherent, right? Just because I say something doesn't mean that my intention or my meaning is how it's going to be perceived necessarily. I think Brutus thinks that way. Brutus is like, I'll just go out there and say my piece, and this is what really happened because it's the truth. But Mark Antony realizes that truth doesn't matter so much as how the truth is perceived. And this is Socrates' whole worry, that truth will be bent because people will understand not truth, but perception. And so I think this is a really great point that you mentioned, Mina, is that how something is perceived is really the important part. Not what is said or done, but how it's perceived. And then how do we proceed from there? So let me ask you, is Mark Antony a good person?
No, because he's using rhetoric to deceive instead of using it to tell the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let me ask you this about Brutus. Is Brutus a good person?
I mean, I think based on that, yeah, because he's not using, like he's trying to tell what he believes is the truth. And he's not trying to deceive. He's just trying to like tell the truth and use he doesn't really use rhetoric as much as Antony does. So I think based on that, like he's trying to use that for a moral purpose of telling the truth. And I think that would mean that he would be a good person.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is actually what Antony says at the very end of the play about Brutus. So Strato and Octavius and Messala are talking about what happened to Brutus after he died. And Antony says, this was the noblest Roman of them all, Brutus. All the conspirators, save only he, did that they did in envy of great Caesar. And the note for envy means malice towards. So everybody killed Caesar out of malice except for Brutus. He only in a general honest thought and common good to all made one of them. His life was gentle and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man. So even Antony recognizes that Brutus does what he does out of goodness. Like he's not killing somebody for evil ends. Like he's actually convinced that despite Caesar being his friend, Caesar is not good for the Republic. And the only way to remedy that is to kill him. So then let's break down these two different speeches real quick. So Brutus's starts on line 15-ish. Okay. So how about Alex, you read Brutus, and Mina, you read Mark Antony. So just read this first speech here, his be patient to the last speech. And then I'll scroll down a little bit too, Mina, for you, but however you want to read it.
Okay. Be patient till the last. Romans, countrymen, and lovers, hear me for my cause, and be silent that you may hear. Believe me for mine honor, and have respect to mine honor, that you may believe. Censure me in your wisdom, and awake your senses, that you may be the better judge. If there be any in this assembly, any dear friend of Caesar's, to him I say that Brutus's love to Caesar was no less than his. If then that friend demanded why Brutus rose against Caesar, this is my answer. Not that I loved Caesar less, but I loved Rome more. Had you rather Caesar were living and die all slaves than that Caesar were dead to live all free men, as Caesar loved me? I wept for him as he was fortunate. I rejoice at it as he was valiant. I honor him, but as he was ambitious, I slew him. There is tears for his love, joy for his fortune, honor for his valor, and death. Hold on, I have to find it. And death for his ambition. Who is here so base that would be a bondman? If any speak for him, have I offended? Who is here so rude that it would not be a Roman? If any speak, for him I have offended. Who is here so vile that will not love his country? If any speak, for him have I offended. I pause for a reply.
Okay, and then Mina, we're down here to, okay, so Antony's friends, Roman countrymen. Lend me your ears.
I guess it would help to be off mute. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred, buried with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man. So are they all honorable men. Come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me, but Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome.
Okay, so I'm going to share an image with you in a second. So let's talk about that. What did you write down this week for the rhetorical choices that they make?
I talked about the amplification of repeating that Brutus was ambitious, yet Brutus says he was ambitious and Brutus is an honorable man. Because I kind of thought that by him amplifying that, it really just, one second. He's like telling the audience how Caesar, he shouldn't be seen as ambitious, and then telling them that like Brutus is like kind of like lying, despite like being honorable. And I said that kind of also fell under innuendo, because is he really like honorable and telling the truth if what Antony says about Caesar is true?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I like that. Mina, what about you? What did you say?
Sorry, I'm trying to look at my response here. I said that one of the like rhetorical devices that I noticed the most throughout the entire thing was hyperbole. And I don't know if this could be considered one, but just repetition in general.
Okay.
Because he says at one point, yet Brutus says he is ambitious and Brutus is an honorable man. But he also like tweaks that a little bit. So I think I called it derision.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So real quick, just I want to keep talking about this. I wanted to show you this because this kind of gets to the crux of like what's happening here in the two. So this is from a book called Thank You for Arguing by Jay Heinrichs. And it's actually where I got the idea for Eminem, because he mentions it using Eminem for this class, because he mentions the rap battles in this chapter. But he says, your audience also has to consider you a good person who wants to do the right thing and will not use them for your own nefarious purposes. So in Eminem, 8 Mile, everyone thinks Eminem is being nefarious, that he's trying to invade this culture and be somebody that he's not, when in fact it's actually Papa Doc. Mark Antony is actually trying to invade this space for nefarious means, to say, look, I'm just like you. I'm just a regular old guy, a good person. I'm not here to, cause a mutiny. And so he says, all of this boils down to Aristotle's 3 essential qualities of a persuasive ethos or character, that you have virtue or cause, that the audience believes you share their values, most important. You have practical wisdom or craft. You appear to know the right thing to do on every occasion, and disinterest, not a lack of interest, but a lack of bias. You seem to be impartial, caring only about the audience's interests rather than your own. So Heinrich's pointing out that ethos, when we talk about persuasion and identifying with our audience, ethos is one of the most important parts, because if the audience doesn't identify with you, if they can't see something of themselves in you, it doesn't matter what you have to say. How does something like amplification or derision and these other rhetorical tactics, how do those things show the audience that Mark Antony seems to be like one of them and Brutus isn't? I just want to quickly, I mentioned the first line already, but even from the beginning, let's just look at how the two of them introduce these speeches. So Brutus goes first, and the first thing he says is, be patient till the last, which is essentially, shut up and let me talk. Don't interrupt me until the very end. It's very important that I get to the end, which is weird. It's like burying the lead. And then he says, Romans, countrymen, and lovers, hear me for my cause and be silent that you may hear. So again, telling them once again, shut up. And he starts Romans, countrymen, and lovers. So friends comes last in that order. But then Mark Antony says, he doesn't tell them to shut up at all. He says, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Please please listen to me. He's not telling them to listen. He's sort of asking in that sense. And he starts with friends because that's more of a connector. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil, and he's being impartial. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones. This is an unbiased statement, right? He's pointing out, look, Caesar, I'm not here to praise Caesar. I'm not here to say that he was a good person. Men are good, men are evil. That's not the goal, which is, disinterest. But then he's obviously pointing also that he knows the right thing to do. I'm not here to praise, I'm here to bury Caesar because that's what we're here to do, right? Brutus may want to talk about whether or not Caesar was a good man, but that's not my goal. What do you all think about this? We're at time, so I'll let someone give one final thought before we wrap up. Or do we want to call it? All right, how about this? Because I actually do have to get to campus. How about we call it, because it's quarter after. So what we'll do is we'll pick this up a little bit next week, because there's just a couple more things I want to talk about with the speeches and Hamlet too, if we have time. Does anybody have questions though before we get out of here? Okay, I just want to let you know that so your first essay isn't due until February 20th. But I do want to go ahead and just quickly let you know, and for the sake of those who couldn't be here today, share on my screen one more time. I would go ahead and get working on this, but your first essay is due in week 6 by February 20th, and the assignment is fairly simple. It's judging a book by its cover. And so what I want you to do essentially, you have 2 options here. I want you to write a 3 to 4 page paper plus a works cited page. I don't have specific requirements on using sources necessarily, but you should use them at your discretion for whatever you need to support. It should be an essay in MLA format. It should be written in essay style. It should be, as academic as you want to make it. But the idea is you have 2 choices. The first one is you can write a rhetorical analysis of a book cover to determine what the cover communicates about the novel, and if it's an effective, honest, and or truthful representation of the book's contents. So is the cover artist and the people in the publisher, are they sort of using rhetorical tools ethically to get you to, want to read this book, more or less? And then, you have options with that. It should be a literary novel, but it should be one that is your favorite or someone that you like. And the other option is you can do a rhetorical analysis about the stylistic elements of book covers in a chosen literary genre. So rather than pick one cover, you would essentially review a number of different covers from a genre. So let's say horror. We were talking about horror earlier. You would talk about what elements make up that style of cover. So like if you were to do horror, what are the common elements that appear across this genre in the covers of novels? Maybe it's dark colors, maybe you like the color red and black. Maybe it's something ominous or something like basically I'm just like, what's similar across that genre? And so I think this is probably just the wiki page, maybe. Oh yeah, so this is just some help on how you might do that particular essay. It's not due for 3 weeks, but I wanted to go ahead and let you know now so you can start working on it in case you want to reread the novel or you need to get some notes together. I just didn't want to introduce it, in week 6 and be like, you have 5 days to write this essay. So questions on that? All right, well, I've kept you long enough. Go forth and be merry. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you next Monday.